Have you ever built something so reliable, so elegant in its design, that it quietly did its job for years, only to be told one day, without warning, that it no longer matters? That's how it started. "My system is a relic," the new CTO said, standing in my office like he already owned the place. His tone was casual, almost friendly, as if he were discussing a design choice instead of the foundation of a $2 billion custody platform. He called it a routine upgrade, a necessary move, toward a more scalable AI-enhanced security stack, a third-party system called OmniShield. Next-gen plug-and-play predictive threat analytics, the kind of language investors loved and engineers silently feared. I didn't argue. I'd spent the last 6 years building a custom crypto custody architecture that had never failed, never leaked, and had been quietly safeguarding some of the most valuable private keys in the Western Hemisphere. But that didn't matter now. The future was cloud native. They told me my system would be sunsetted by the end of the quarter. No migration plan, no knowledge transfer, no handshake, just a polite dismissal wrapped in buzzwords. I saved my work, stood up, and walked out. But that wasn't the end. That was the setup. I didn't get into crypto security for the headlines. Back in 2017, when exchanges were collapsing under the weight of coordinated hacks and sloppy architecture, I was living in a windowless room in Berlin, running penetration tests for early Ethereum startups and eating noodles 5 nights a week. The money was terrible, but the learning curve was brutal and beautiful. You couldn't afford to be slow, you couldn't afford to be wrong. You had to think like an attacker before anyone else did. Blockwell Vault came into my life the way serious problems usually do, quietly and with urgency. A friend from a private Telegram channel messaged me one night. "Custody startup, funded, breach scare last month. They want someone who actually knows what the hell they're doing. Interested?" I was on a train to Zurich the next morning. At the time, Blockwell was managing under $200 million in assets, most of it parked in cold storage with clunky manual protocols and spreadsheet-driven reconciliation. The founders were smart, ambitious, and terrified. They'd just survived a scare, a partial compromise of a staging wallet due to a junior dev's sloppy key management. They needed more than a patch. They needed a philosophy. What I built wasn't sexy. It didn't make for impressive demo days or flashy roadmaps. It was a layered, redundant, fully auditable hybrid security stack that lived partly on hardened air-gapped hardware and partly in a bespoke microservice mesh that authenticated every move across 8 layers of verification. Multi-sig, biometric, thresholds, time locks, decoy shells, adversarial simulations. We incorporated all of it. Every anomaly triggered a protocol that not only recorded it, but demanded human review from 2 separate departments. Not a single Satoshi moved without being shadowed, signed, and stored in real time, including rollback capacity. Within 18 months, Blockwell went from a struggling boutique custodian to a preferred partner for institutional funds. We passed 3 independent audits without a single critical finding. We handled $2.4 billion in total flows by 2022 and never experienced a breach, a loss, or even a near miss. Not once. Not in 5 years. The system ran so well that eventually no one talked about it. And that was the problem. Because success, insecurity is invisible. When things work, people assume they always will. And when new leadership arrives, hungry for disruption, for impact, for metrics, they don't see the architecture. They see the absence of motion and think it's stagnation. They see quiet and assume weakness. Landon Vale came in like a silicon. Valley archetype, brilliant resume, ex-Palantir, Stanford MBA, hands-on with 3 exits. He talked in frameworks and philosophies, obsessed over abstraction. He said things like zero-trust orchestration and adaptive crypto governance in meetings that should have been about firewall tuning and entropy sources. He asked about KPIs, not failure states. He praised off-the-shelf solutions for being scalable, agile, and battle-tested. He didn't ask why our custom stack had survived when others didn't. He asked why we weren't using OmniShield, the latest autonomous threat response product that promised 99.9999% uptime and predictive breach modeling. He didn't want to understand what I had built. He wanted to replace it, preferably before Q2, so he could present the migration in the next investor call. The irony was obvious to me. The same institutional clients we supported had pulled assets from other custodians who'd adopted these so-called modern stacks. After those platforms experienced exploits that started, always, the same way. With a slick pitch deck, a black box, AI security solution, and the quiet decommissioning of something hand-built by someone who actually knew where the weak points were. But none of that mattered. I had become invisible. And to Landon, invisible meant obsolete. They let me go on a Tuesday. No drama, no confrontation. Just a 30-minute meeting with HR and a carefully worded statement from Landon about strategic realignment. He didn't look up from his tablet. Once. They even offered a small severance, 3 months' pay, NDA baked in. A lawyer had clearly touched every sentence. I nodded through it, signed nothing, and left the room with the same calm I had when I walked in. My keycard was disabled by the time I reached the elevator. What struck me wasn't the dismissal. It was how surgical it was. No one from the core engineering team was told. There was no farewell, no Slack thread, no lunch invite from people. I'd mentored for half a decade, just silence. Like I'd been erased, but I wasn't angry. Not then, I'd seen this play out before. Smart people get replaced by systems they would have never trusted. In crypto especially, leadership turnover moves fast, faster than the tech itself. New C-levels don't inherit infrastructure. They inherit narratives. And Landon was crafting a clean one. New CTO, new tech, new era. No need to mention the old system had logged nearly $2 billion in transaction volume without a single forensic discrepancy. I spent the rest of the day cleaning out my desk. I pulled my encrypted backup drives, wiped the testnet terminals I'd used for years and left behind the laminated access maps no one would understand anyway. Most of the team wouldn't notice what was gone until it failed. And by then, it wouldn't be mine to fix. I stopped by the coffee shop down the block, the one where I used to meet clients in the early days when Blockwell was just 3 guys and a borrowed AWS instance. I ordered a cortado, sat by the window, and watched the late afternoon sun hit the glass towers across the street. I opened the slim leather wallet in my coat. Inside were a few neatly printed business cards I'd made the year before. Malik Qureshi, independent crypto security consultant. Quiet systems for loud problems. I slid one out and placed it beside my coffee. I wasn't sure when I'd need it. But I knew it wouldn't be long. The signs were there even before I left. It started small. Always does. The first thing Landon did was reorganize reporting lines. Security engineers who used to come straight to me were rerouted through product. Enablement leads with no deep tech background. We stopped holding threat modeling sessions and started holding resilience vision syncs. He replaced 2 core devs with consultants from a boutique cloud integration firm based in Miami, guys who talked fast, billed faster, and knew nothing about crypto custody. Then came the dashboards. Landon had them installed on massive vertical displays around the office, real-time analytics, threat graphs, animated incident maps. They looked great, especially when investors visited. I remember standing in the hallway, one afternoon, watching a circle blink red in Eastern Europe. One of the junior engineers leaned over to me and whispered, "It's just a UI layer. Doesn't connect to anything." I nodded. That part was obvious. What was less obvious was the cultural shift happening underneath. The old Blockwell ran on quiet discipline. We logged everything. Every action was verified, then verified again. Our culture wasn't paranoid. It was precise. We didn't trust pretty things. We trusted cold logs, system behavior, recovery drills. We tested firewalls at 2 a.m. and simulated insider threats for fun. But under Landon, precision was replaced with performance. Not actual system performance, visual, social performance, how things appeared. Investors were now shown glossy slide decks and marketing language about AI-reinforced zero-knowledge compliance. Internally, we all knew what that meant. A cloud-first vendor called OmniShield with no native crypto support, but a world-class sales team and impeccable branding. OmniShield had promised a seamless migration. 2 weeks to fully autonomous security, the slide said. They demoed predictive incident resolution. I asked for a technical walkthrough, how it handled MPC key sharding, or how it avoided token bridge vulnerabilities. They didn't have answers, but no one seemed to care. We were told our internal system would be deprecated in phases, but within 2 weeks, entire modules were ripped out. Cold wallet access logs stopped updating. A legacy firewall I'd configured myself was replaced. With an AWS WAF instance so generic it may as well have been open. I got texts from old teammates. Have you seen this? They removed the staging gate checks. Who's approving transfers now? No one had clear answers, not even inside. But Landon was on podcasts now, talking about agile disruption in fintech. He said things like, legacy architecture is the enemy of scale. He posted screenshots of our office dashboards on Twitter. His followers loved them. Inside the building, I could feel the silence growing. The team wasn't arguing anymore. They were complying. The best engineers had either left or were looking to, and the ones who stayed, they were treating incidents like expected noise, background errors, minor anomalies, routine burps in the system. But I knew better. In crypto, security, routine is never routine. It's a warning. One that's usually ignored until it's too late. The breach happened at 3:12 a.m. on a Sunday morning, exactly the kind of quiet, unmonitored window an attacker waits for. I wasn't working there anymore, of course. I found out the same way most of the industry did. A flurry of encrypted signal messages, back-to-back pings from ex-colleagues, and a single line from an anonymous source in one of the Discord channels I still lurked in. Blockwell's down. The vaults. Compromised. Massive outflows. By the time I got to my terminal, the Ethereum mempool was already flooded with transactions pointing to 3 previously dormant smart contracts interacting with Blockwell custody addresses. It was surgical, controlled, patient, and deliberate. Whoever was behind it knew exactly where to strike and what the thresholds were. No brute force, no trial and error, just silence and extraction. I pulled up the on-chain data and watched. $120 million, mostly ETH and wrapped BTC, drained from wallets I had personally helped design security protocols for. These weren't edge accounts or inactive wallets. These were Blockwell's institutional vaults, hedge funds, insurance consortiums, a few sovereign assets we were never supposed to talk about. Even in the chaos, I knew exactly how it had happened. OmniShield had replaced our core verification bridge with a cloud microservice. It was supposed to intelligently authenticate large transactions using predictive behavior analytics. In practice, it removed human oversight and treated crypto withdrawals like wire transfers. Worse, the fallback protocols, the real safety net, were either misconfigured or outright removed. Cold wallets hadn't engaged. The air gap protocol, disabled during migration, multi-sig enforcement, overridden by a rushed DevOps patch to make the OmniShield stack compatible with our older signing tool. It was a perfect storm of trust in automation, speed over scrutiny, and a total misunderstanding of crypto custody's unforgiving nature. Internal staff at Blockwell were completely locked out. Logins were failing. Audit trails were inaccessible. Every support channel at OmniShield was either unresponsive or looping generic help articles. Landon was reportedly unreachable, in contact with vendors, according to a vague Slack message someone leaked. From the outside, it looked like a high-profile exploit, but from where I sat in my home office staring at lines of code I'd written 3 years ago, it looked more like assisted negligence. Because none of this would have been possible if the system we'd built had still been running. That system would have flagged the anomaly at the wallet bridge before the first Satoshi moved. It would have paused the pipeline and activated the human intervention protocol. It would have sealed the cold wallets before a second key was even verified. It would have done its job, quietly, precisely, stubbornly. But that system had been decommissioned, replaced by something that looked smarter, sold better, and broke faster. And now, $100 million were gone. The crypto press was already circling. Decentralized custody platform suffers massive exploit. Security system replaced weeks before breach. CTO's AI solution under scrutiny. Headlines everywhere. But inside Blockwell it was panic. Clients demanding answers. Insurers pulling coverage. Regulators asking for audit trails that no longer existed. And then just before 7 a.m., I got the message that changed everything. Zara, Malik, can you talk? We're in deep trouble. We need your help. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back a single word. When? Zara called at 6:58 a.m. sharp. Her voice was composed, but only just. We've lost the vault telemetry. OmniShield says it's a synchronization issue, but we can't confirm anything. We don't even know how much was taken. I didn't speak right away, not because I was processing, but because I already knew. I'd been watching it unfold for hours, but I needed to hear it from the inside. Is Landon involved? I asked. She hesitated. He's in a series of escalation meetings. Legal, PR, vendor chain. He's not hands-on. He says this is just a technical snag. A technical snag. That's what he was calling the largest institutional breach since the Axion debacle. I took a breath. What do you need from me? There was a pause, a kind of silence that carries both embarrassment and desperation. Then she said it. Come in as a consultant. Temporarily. Just to help us stabilize the environment, maybe restore some of the legacy architecture. You're the only one who knows how the cold wallet lattice actually functioned. OmniShield's team keeps deferring. No, one can even explain the rollback logic. I swiveled in my chair and looked out the window. The city was still quiet. Mornings like this always were. That deep pre-crisis silence before the headlines break. My consulting rate is $500 an hour, I said evenly. Time starts when I walk in the door. That's fine. No approvals needed. I'll text you the new access codes. And I want read-only access to everything. All comms with OmniShield, all forensic logs, all contracts. You'll have it. I'm not doing PR, Zara. You don't have to. We just need it fixed. I closed my laptop. The business card I'd set beside my coffee weeks ago was still on the desk. I picked it up, slid it into my coat pocket, and grabbed my bag. As I walked out, my phone buzzed again. Zara. Bring any backups you have. Legal's asking if we still have historical signatures for Vault 6E. OmniShield says they weren't included in the migration. I didn't reply. Vault 6E was one of the original institutional custodial accounts. It housed a multi-client pool of assets from 3 hedge funds, an NFT fund, and a pension-backed DAO. If those records were gone, Blockwell wasn't looking at just client loss. They were looking at criminal negligence. I slipped into the driver's seat and started the ignition. The street outside was empty, washed in pale morning light. As I pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, not out of nostalgia, but instinct. Something was coming. Something big. And this time, I wasn't walking in as the engineer who built it. I was walking in as the only one who could save it. By the time I reached Blockwell's downtown office, the building was already in full containment mode. The reception desk was unstaffed, overhead lights dimmed to save power, and a notice was taped to the glass entrance. Closed for internal audit. Upstairs, the mood was even darker. Key personnel were clustered in silence, eyes fixed on screens that displayed data no one could verify. Zara met me at the door, her face drawn and unreadable. We've isolated the outbound addresses, she said quietly, ushering me through. But OmniShield can't confirm if the keys were compromised directly or if the requests were spoofed internally. I didn't ask for the tour. I walked straight to the server room, where someone, mercifully, had preserved my original dev environment on a separate machine. It was disconnected from the main grid, stored under a temporary workstation label, a quiet act of foresight by someone who still believed in redundancy. Good. That was something. I plugged in one of my cold drives and began rebuilding the test environment from my last archived snapshot. The original audit logs, API keys, signature, maps, all of it came back to life in under 20 minutes. While OmniShield's engineers were still buried in Slack threads and Zoom handoffs, I had already reconstructed a mirror image of the vault structure as it existed the week before the migration. They'd overwritten most of the automated rollback protocols, but the failsafes I built weren't so easy to kill. In one obscure folder, Archbridge Old Legacy Noindex, I found the local record of transaction signatures that had quietly continued syncing with an offsite server I'd hidden inside. A load balancer. That system had logged everything, even the breach. I ran a verification script and cross-checked the outflow routes. It took less than 5 minutes to trace the breach path. A permissions elevation exploit via an undocumented admin endpoint exposed in OmniShield's abstraction layer. The breach wasn't just preventable, it was predictable. "Can you restore it?" Zara asked, watching me scan the cold wallet map. "I can re-enable the hard stops and reassert key verification rules within the hour," I said, not looking up. "Partial recovery, that depends. I'll need time to track the remaining outbound flows, but the signatures weren't wiped. That gives us a fighting chance." "And the reports? The forensic logs?" "They're all here. Just not where OmniShield was looking." Around us, the room remained tense, but something shifted. The younger engineers started watching what I was doing. I caught one of them recording my terminal with their phone, quietly, like someone trying to remember how things used to work when they did work. I generated a real-time reconciliation report for Vault 6E, complete with time-stamped keys, counterparty IDs, and custody signatures. It printed flawlessly, something OmniShield's team had claimed would take their forensics department at least 4 days. I handed the pages to Zara. She looked at the numbers, then at me. They told the board those keys were unrecoverable. They weren't. They were just inconvenient. Landon still hadn't appeared, but I knew where this was headed. With each system I reactivated, each report I restored, I was re-establishing a version of Blockwell that Landon had tried to erase. And the longer OmniShield's silence dragged on, the more obvious that became. By the end of the day, we had restored 3 of the 5 compromised vaults. $37 million in assets were locked down and in recovery. The other losses? Still being traced, but no longer free-floating. I leaned back, cracked my knuckles, and saved the session. The system they called obsolete had just done in 6 hours what their predictive AI stack couldn't do in 6 days. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I arrived an hour before anyone else and made myself a cup of coffee in the staff kitchen. No one spoke to me yet, some out of respect, others out of confusion. I was no longer an employee, not exactly a guest, but undeniably in control of the one thing no one else could manage. The truth, I wasn't done restoring vaults, but something had been nagging at me since I found that hidden exploit. It wasn't just the vulnerability that bothered me, it was the pattern. The breach didn't feel like a random hit. It felt targeted, timed, and orchestrated by someone with a disturbing level of knowledge about Blockwell's transition window. And someone inside had given that window to them, whether knowingly or not. I requested Zara grant me temporary access to internal communications and vendor contracts. She didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need," she said. I started with the migration timeline. OmniShield had been brought in under a special contract, a sole source procurement bypassing the usual RFP process. According to the documents, Landon had pushed the contract through by citing security exigency, a rarely used clause that allowed executive override on technical decisions. Then I saw the numbers. Blockwell was paying OmniShield $4.2 million annually for a security stack that, according to their own onboarding documents, lacked native crypto protocol support. They had mapped their infrastructure as if we were running traditional fintech APIs, ignoring everything that made digital assets unique: multi-sig logic, real-time key distribution, zero confirmation failover. The deeper I dug, the more it became obvious this wasn't a partnership based on technical vetting. It was a deal. A relationship. Landon had worked at Strategix Capital before joining Blockwell, a boutique venture group that, surprise, owned a majority stake in OmniShield. Emails confirmed it. A message from a Strategix partner to Landon, dated just weeks before the contract was signed, read, We appreciate you accelerating the integration timeline. This win will look great in the Q1 report. This wasn't about modernizing Blockwell's infrastructure. It was about Landon delivering value to his former firm. He hadn't replaced my system because it was broken. He'd replaced it because it wasn't billable. The system I built didn't generate margins. It didn't impress VCs or produce partner kickbacks. It just worked. Reliably. Quietly. Invisibly. And that made it a threat. I cross-referenced timelines. The vulnerability that allowed the breach? Introduced exactly 12 days after the final integration milestone with OmniShield was reported as complete. The code that exposed the admin endpoint wasn't even reviewed by internal staff. It was pushed directly from OmniShield's CI/CD pipeline as part of an urgent performance patch. I documented everything, every email, every change log, every redacted contract clause that suddenly made sense when viewed in sequence. I organized it into a timeline, backed by screenshots, log files, transaction IDs, and vendor invoices. By EA. Noon, Zara had seen enough. We have to bring this to the board. She looped in the general counsel and 2 senior partners from Blockwell's risk committee. They read in silence. When one of them reached the message referencing the Q1 report, he stood up and walked out, muttering something about needing to check insurance implications. I stayed out of the meeting that followed. I didn't need to be in the room. My work was done. The system had been restored. The data had been recovered. And now, the rot underneath it all was exposed. Landon finally surfaced late that afternoon. I saw him down the hall, standing rigid, at the glass wall of a conference room, arms crossed, face pale. His voice didn't carry far, but I caught phrases through the glass. This isn't what it looks like. They don't understand how startup velocity works. Those were standard integrations, but no one was nodding. When the meeting ended, he didn't come to see me. He went straight for the elevator, followed closely by someone from legal. His keycard wouldn't work for much longer. That evening, Zara knocked on the conference room door where I was finalizing the recovery scripts. The board wants to move forward. They've seen enough. They're ending the OmniShield contract effective immediately. I didn't look up. And Landon? He's suspended pending investigation. Possibly more. The SEC has been notified. I nodded, saved my work, and leaned back in the chair. The hum of servers filled the silence like a quiet exhale. It had never been about security. It had been about appearances, politics, and profit. But now, at last, the truth was louder than the noise. The reckoning came faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, the OmniShield contract had been terminated. All integration work ceased immediately. Their access credentials were revoked, and every node tied to their infrastructure was shut down, archived, or replaced. The legal team initiated breach of contract proceedings, citing gross negligence, misrepresentation of capability, and potential conflict of interest. I reviewed the filings myself, clean, direct, devastating. Landon didn't return after that Thursday. His resignation was officially voluntary, but the internal memo made it clear. A full investigation was underway. Whispers followed him out, about back-channel deals, about preloaded equity in OmniShield, about performance bonuses structured around successful implementation. If true, it wasn't just negligent, it was calculated. Zara took interim, technical leadership. She wasn't a systems architect, but she was steady, smart, and she asked the right questions. The board gave me a temporary retainer to stay on during the transition, with full authority to reestablish infrastructure, retrain the ops team, and build audit-grade documentation for regulators and insurers. My rate stayed at $500 an hour. No one blinked. The mood at Blockwell shifted. Tense, yes, but focused. The engineers who'd felt sidelined began returning to real work. Tuning configs, validating keys, running simulations instead of PR calls. The company felt technical again, grounded. It reminded me of what it had been before the dashboards, before the headlines, before the vision. As for the breach, by week's end we'd recovered $74 million of the stolen assets. Cold wallet signatures had blocked several outgoing transactions midstream. My legacy system's hidden audit hooks, left intact by someone smart or lucky, proved crucial. Every transaction recovered was another nail in the coffin of the idea that I had built something obsolete. The best part came quietly. One of the founding partners pulled me aside after a system recovery review. He was in his 60s, dressed like he still thought in ledger paper and long division. "You know," he said, "Landon gave us a solution that looked good in a slide deck. You gave us one that worked. When this is over, I hope you'll consider staying on, but on your terms this time." I nodded, but I didn't answer. Justice in tech rarely comes in the form of headlines or lawsuits. It comes in moments like this, when the room finally understands the difference between working and working well, when silence, once mistaken for irrelevance, becomes the foundation of trust. Blockwell would recover. And now, they knew exactly who had made that possible. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own office, no longer at Blockwell, but in a quiet workspace I designed myself, surrounded by machines that don't need to impress anyone. My consulting firm now supports 14 custody platforms across 3 countries. Not because I advertised, but because word spreads fast in an industry built on trust. Blockwell recovered, faster than expected. They settled quietly with OmniShield, reinstated a new version of my hybrid system, and passed their regulatory audit with 0 flags. And the irony? The improvements I made after the breach pushed their transaction efficiency up by nearly 18%. It wasn't just about fixing what broke, it was about finally appreciating what worked. People often ask me now, what's the biggest lesson from all this? Simple. In crypto, you don't secure assets with buzzwords. You secure them with people who understand what failure actually looks like, who've lived it, who built systems to survive it. Now that this story is out, I'm curious, have you ever seen a flashy new system fail because someone ignored what already worked? Drop it in the comments. And if this story made you think a little differently about expertise, leadership, or trust, maybe hit subscribe. Quiet systems, after all, don't sell themselves, but they're always there when the noise collapses.